let's watch this one then. Should the better player always win? This is an interesting one, especially for how much Rivals we've been playing recently and watching the community develop in that game. And we've currently entered the era of matchmaking. The early era was everyone's boosted, everyone's stacking. Those players wouldn't win solo queue. And now we're entering the era of supports are broken. And we're also entering the era of it's the matchmaking in the game. And I've seen that a lot of places. There's that one video over here. So we'll talk about that later though. But like, should the better player always win? I think yes. But is that always true? In a 1v1 game, of course that'll always be true, right?
2017 didn't go his way.
Right? Surely?
On the stage, and he earned this Evo win. What an incredible...
In theory, we all like competitive integrity, but in reality, should the better player always win?
What? No, all right. I know that sounds bad.
As people, we like to know that our efforts are going to be rewarded. If we can be certain that the more effort we put in, the more success we'll get out of an activity, the more motivated we will be to improve and chase after victory. So that raises the question, are there reasons for developers to break this rule and allow weaker players to win?
RNG.
Well, the principle of loss aversion states...
I think of Pokemon, because like Pokemon is a good game, I think, as an example, where you can be an extremely good player and extremely talented, but you won't always win every game because there is RNG. But you can put yourself in a position where you can win most of your games by being a good player. Not every game though, but like you will win the majority of your games. And if you play always like within your own, like what you could control, that's what makes you a much better player than someone else. But once you get at that, like the same thing keeps happening. Like once you get to the top level, where like you can just get unlucky. Like what if your sleep misses 4 times in a row? You know what I mean? Like, or you sleep for 3 turns or something like that, right? I think there is some games where that ends up happening, where it's RNG. But outside of RNG though,
states that losing can feel twice as bad as winning feels good. This presents an interesting challenge for developers of competitive multiplayer games. If we know that players are going to be demoralized and demotivated by a 50-50 win-loss ratio, but that they also wouldn't appreciate insincere ego-boosting...
Hey there, champ. We've noticed you've been on a serious loss streak recently. Sorry to see that. We're certain it's your teammates' fault, so we decided to help you out a little. Take 100 free RR on us. Your new rank is Silver 2. Good luck from the Valorant team.
Freebies that inflate the statistics of worse players.
I disagree. I think players would love this. I think they think it would be amazing. And what is my evidence on that? Teams that get cheaters, and then they're like, yeah, this is a free win.
With their stronger competitors, how can we retain player engagement and statistical fairness in the multiplayer landscape? If you really stop to think about it, a lot of online discourse surrounding the multiplayer genre has its roots stemmed into this issue. Long has the discussion on skill-based matchmaking permeated the breadths of angry Twitter posts.
The skill-based matchmaking, holy shit.
And on the other side, you often see large discontent stem from games featuring comeback mechanics that make it easier for a player or team at a disadvantage to claw their way back onto equal footing.
Oh yeah, comeback mechanics.
If you look deeply into these games, it becomes clear that almost no competitive experience is actually truly 100% fair. But that raises the question, what separates experiences that feel 100%?
Let's thank you. Watching a video of yours told my monkey brain to switch maze fire buttons. You're a god. Wait, how long ago did I make a video about that? Holy shit. Hey, happy for you. Grats. I'm trying to think, how long ago would I have given someone a tip on May to swap their fire and secondary fire? Holy shit, that must be an old one.
100% fair from experiences that feel like they heavily reward the lesser skilled players. To find that out, let's look at some instances where game balance leans in either direction and determine whether these...
Wait, you have your primary and secondary fire swapped? Yeah, because the icicle, you put it on left click and you treat it like as if you're shooting, like you use it as a projectile. Same thing that you would normally do. Wait, what do you mean? How many things do you aim really hard for with right click? Do you know my Sojourn's also swapped? My railgun's on left click and my projectile's on right click. Wait, do you not know that? Because it's hit scan. So it's more of a powerful shot. You want it to be the most fluid motion that you're used to, which is aiming and clicking. And your left pointer finger is going to be much more, or your pointer finger is going to be much more used to that as opposed to your middle finger. So you'd want it to be on, like, the more precise shot to be on the left click.
Gameplay experiences strike a solid balance of
My Sojourner swap, but that's because CarQ is big-brained and he told me? So I'm not big-brained for doing the same thing in revert? Nah, that's crazy.
player engagement and statistical fairness.
That's crazy. This is actual rage bait. Nah, no way he's here to say based.
A lot of shooter games have settled with their decision to leave skill-based matchmaking in at all levels of play. Rarely will you ever see a competitive game with the ranked game mode lacking.
True. People always ask me whenever I played quick play, why are you playing quick play? What's the point? I'm like, well, it's the same shit as comp 90% of the time. I don't like, people always ask, like, is there skill-based matchmaking in quick play? If you play a competitive game and it doesn't specifically tell you that there is not skill-based matchmaking, it has skill-based matchmaking. It does. Okay? There's probably a clip you could find of me playing my first on Freedom Bum when I was leveling the account. In like the first couple lobbies, I bumped into some Punisher player, probably bronze or silver, and he was on his turret trying to chase me. I just kept running around in circles behind him, and he could not catch me. My quick play games, no matter what game I'm playing, are probably going to be very fucking difficult as opposed to like the average game, right? That's just the way it is. Scrubble's thinking that they do one once.
But a lot of games
Quick play or
secretly
ranked.
matchmake you off invisible casual ranks as well. This
Yes,
may
which
seem
is
a little
skill-based
strange, as
matchmaking,
these
yeah.
modes are advertised to the player with the allure of not being ranked. However, in
I'm
reality,
covering the Blizzard
what they're
thing.
doing is simply not telling you your rank. It's
Yes.
still there, just hidden from the player.
Yeah.
However, this lack of information conveyance gets the job done pretty well, as players are able to relax more and are affected by losses less negatively as a result. This perceived lack of stakes lowers tension and loosens the tie between improvement and perceived skill, as no matter how good you get at casual play, you're not going to get flashy rank-up animations you can show off to your friends.
Correct.
This gives developers an opportunity to break game symmetry in order to allow for weaker players to have a more enjoyable experience. Game symmetry is pretty simply explained by the name alone, being an experience where all players compete under the exact same underlying set of rules. The most obvious example of a symmetrical game would be chess. Everyone has the same pieces, plays on the same board, and moves in the same ways. Except in a
different random point, just I have to put it out loud because I'm just curious if you guys know the answer. Isn't chess technically a solved game these days? Like, technically?
single match of chess, this actually isn't true. Whoever plays white always moves first, which is a tactile advantage over the other player. That's why
we were watching some other videos sometime, and somebody brought up that chess is now a solved game, and like there's a reason why they've started doing speed chess and like other things, and it's like the reason for that is because people figured out how to. I didn't look into it, but I remember reading it in chat at the time, and I was like, at some point I want to come back to that, but I never did.
highest level of competition, Grand Finals, chess matches are played as a set of multiple games. That way, both players get a chance to play white and black. Furthermore, in many first-to-one chess tournaments, a color pairing algorithm is employed to ensure all players receive a close to 50% ratio of white and black games throughout the whole tournament. However, in casual matches, usually the player's color is decided on a coin flip. This impacts the game's competitive integrity negatively, as the luckier player is now rewarded in addition to the more skilled player. This is also seen in many multiplayer team games as casual modes. Team shooters like TF2, Overwatch, Rainbow Six, and Valorant have game modes built around an asymmetrical attack and defense structure of gameplay. And due to the innate impossibility of balancing an asymmetrical game to 100% perfection, either attack or defense tends to be favored for victory. In competitive matches, these games force teams to play an equal amount of games on attack and defense in order to decide the match. In contrast, Overwatch and TF2's casual matches are first to one, meaning one team is randomly assigned to attack and one to defense. This adds an aspect of luck that is mostly unnoticeable unless you're really paying attention to it, but does subtly skew match results potentially in the favor of a weaker player. It's hard to get mad at this kind of unfairness.
That's interesting. So they can put you in a lobby. Like, let's say, you know what? I kind of want to ask if that's true. If I ever get a chance to talk with some devs about that kind of stuff. Like, is the reason why you get a quick play game versus a GM player, but you're only plat, is because it put you on the attacking side, and that map typically wins on attack, and it's easier to attack. So, like, it's fine to put you on that map. Are there any devs around? I saw you earlier, but I wasn't going to just, like, call you out. You know what I mean? Is that true? Is that, like, actually something that gets considered? Where it's like, yeah, we might have some player that's the outlier, like, either really good or really bad. And it's like, okay, like, you're going to load into this map. And it's like, okay, well, that map on attack, you, like, in quick play, people win like 30% or like 54% of the time. So like we'll put them on the attacking side if they're a weaker player, because like they're more likely to win or overcome the challenges in the end, because like attacking is easier versus this really good player. Is that actually a thing? Also, if you can't answer, hey, no pressure. No pressure. You don't have to answer the question. I wasn't gonna originally ask. I was just gonna leave it how it was. But you know, after seeing that, no, it's not taking that into account in quick play. If there's an outlier, the main way to combat this is to give the other team the higher average MMR players, but not at the highest outlier. Interesting. That's how I think it would have worked. I'm GM player, so they give me plats. The other team, they have one plat player that's give their teammates diamonds, right? So like on average, their teammates are better than my teammates, but like the disparity, or just like the big difference, is the plat player and me on the other two teams, right? So like on average, their players are slightly better than mine, but they have one much worse player, and my team has one way better player. That makes sense. Okay.
As even though each match does hold an uncontrollable luck-based element that results in player advantage, over the course of a play session, you're unlikely to skew heavily in one direction over the other. Additionally, game designers work as hard as they can to make this attacker-defender-sided advantage as minimal as possible. And while competitive play does retain symmetry in most cases, many competitive game modes, when stretched to their limit, do break symmetry to tiebreak, with one team ending up...
No coin flip, get that... No, do not bring up that trauma.
...playing a bonus round on the potentially more favorable side, and the other team drawing the short end of the stick. It's interesting to note that while this certainly does serve to level out a player's experience with small instances of luck, many of these instances of asymmetry are to prevent stalemates or reduce match time. Many people queuing for casual game modes...
Oh boy, I can't wait to play a 20-minute match of Valorant before work today.
...simply don't have the time to play multiple rounds on attack and defense, and when there's no rank involved, the people who do have the time aren't going to be as frustrated if they draw the weaker side. Yep. Valorant stands out.
Actually, you know what's funny? It says right there. Watch. Hang on.
Do have the time aren't going to be as frustrated if they draw the weaker side.
Not even that upset, probably. Person who died. You know what, though? You know what the worst part is, though? The people that do take quick play super seriously and get really mad at you if you're not like full tryhard. Those people are the worst. Those people will genuinely annoy me. And they'll always say the same thing. They'll always say, well, what's the point of playing if you're not even trying? No, you're trying. You're just not sweating your nuts off. Because like a good player knows the difference. You can't tell the difference, but I can tell the difference. If I'm sweating my nuts off, I'm hard calming, I'm counter swapping, I'm working off of your picks, I'm doing everything in my possible ability to win. I'm doing everything I can, right? You are not hard calming in your quick play game. You're basically 95% of the time when people get mad at you, they're like, why'd you die there? Why aren't you playing this? Why don't you swap around me, right? You are not trying your absolute best. And I can tell that you're not trying your absolute best, because if you were, you would be doing all of these things. But you and I both know it's ridiculous to do that. So you're not doing it. You're just kind of like projecting, getting mad.
Valorant stands out as an example that vehemently refuses to give either team an advantage, forcing teams to tiebreak by winning a round on attack, followed immediately by a round on defense. If you win one and lose the other, the game will make both teams vote on whether they wish to draw the match or do another round of tiebreakers. This means that a Valorant match can technically...
I never want to draw on Valorant, though. I always want to go for the win. I always get annoyed when people vote to draw.
Go on for infinity should every player agree to keep playing, but often competitive games will force a tie to avoid this problem. The existence of these asymmetrical casual game modes provides a solid learning ground for less experienced players, giving them a space to practice with less stakes and a higher impact from luck, which will let them observe what gameplay decisions result in success and which result in defeat. These game modes do result in the better player losing on unbalanced maps some of the time, but the separation between symmetrical and asymmetrical game modes provides spaces both for players who play simply for fun and aren't concerned with the competitive integrity of their match, and for players who want to compete, improve, and rise up the ranks.
Ooh, that's a tough scene added right there.
Symmetry and the separation of it is a common design principle in competitive games, and nowhere else is that more clear than in fighting games. As far as
True.
esports goes, fighting games are one of the most clear examples of a symmetrical gameplay experience.
And it's also one of the
Every
few places you
player plays
can't
on
blame
the
your
exact same
teammates. It's
stage,
really up to
has
you.
access to the exact same roster of characters, and fights for the sole goal of reducing your opponent's HP to
I'm not personally a big fighting game guy, but I get the appeal.
In order to provide a more varied gameplay experience. While it is true that every player has access to the same selection of characters barring DLC and whatnot, in 99% of instances, an actual match between two fighting game players will not be 100% fair. This discrepancy is a result of matchups. In symmetrical games, oftentimes players are given the option to choose a limited number of
like
tools
certain
for the
characters are
largest
good versus
breaking
other
match,
characters?
and each of these tools function differently than the rest of the pack. Imagine if in chess, you could arrange the pieces of your board in any order, just so long as you use 8 pawns, a queen, a king, and 2 of everything else. Certain setups would be innately disadvantaged against other setups, and while there certainly would be setups that provide the most safety and the least likelihood for a bad matchup, it's inevitable that someone bordering on the line of creativity and insanity would develop a setup with the sole purpose of beating yours. This analogy is a good way to look at the roles selectable characters have in designing multiplayer games. No two characters are built the same, and some may have advantages unique to them that exploit disadvantages unique to others. This has a major impact on character viability, and nowhere is that more prevalent than in fighting games. These character-to-character matchups are so important that many players create charts to demonstrate what characters
the
they
old
think their main
tier
wins or
lists.
lose against.
I know
As
a thing or
with
two about
Symmetry and
those.
Attack and defense style games, developers try their best to make sure all characters have an equal chance of winning against
So
all
Jake, in
characters.
3 months.
But even
Depending
more
on the
so
game
than with map
fighting
design, this
games
proves to be
such as
more of a
Injustice
get it as
2
close as you
range
can
characters
situation.
dominate.
If you design characters with
can
defined
see that.
strengths and weaknesses, it's only a matter of time before a clear poor matchup rears its head.
You'd be surprised. A lot of times, though, games have a hard time figuring out what they should make be that weakness.
Take a character like everyone's favorite sickle-slinging Brit, Axel. His strengths include his extremely long range, his ability to keep his opponents safely at arm's reach, and his solid damage off securing hits when the opponent gets too greedy. Now, place him against a character like Potemkin, whose core strength is that he ever gets close to you, the round ends almost immediately, but is weakened by the fact that he has an incredibly difficult time actually getting close to you due to his slow movement, attacks, and poor reward at his longest ranges. It doesn't take a genius to see that Axel comes out as a clear favorite here, and even though in the most recent game featuring these characters, Potemkin and Axel
So like you
have
were
both
saying
been
before,
rekitted to make the matchup between them as
the
fair
ranged
as
characters
possible,
dominate.
Axel still comes out on top ever so slightly. This aspect of competitive game design affects the inherent balance of a match. In a bad matchup, the better player becomes increasingly less likely to win. If you remove that aspect of the game, everyone has to play the exact same character, and all of a sudden we're playing Street Fighter 1 and nobody is having fun.
Yeah, that's true. It's hard. It's hard to say what's the different or balance versus fun. I mean, fun is the number one though. Real talk.
In instances like these, it's inarguable that the better player will sometimes lose, but we agree it's a necessary evil to keep the game expressive and enjoyable. This does raise the question though, where is the cutoff at which point we begin to refute a game's systems as being competitively unfair, even if they add more enjoyment to the game overall? Is it, I don't know, intentionally kneecapping certain frustrating playstyles so that better players playing them don't frustrate worse ones?
The answer, yes. I think it is. Intentionally kneecapping certain frustrating playstyles so that better players playing them don't get frustrated or don't frustrate worse ones. That's 26 with the prime. Wait, what? What does that aim?
Well, if we look
another
into
me?
the world of live service competitive games, we can come to a pretty definite no, believe it or not, as many different games across multiple genres have a storied history of keeping frustrating options intentionally underpowered to allow newer, less experienced players to have a more satisfying experience.
Thing to 13 months. Appreciate it.
All we need to do to find an example is look back 3 paragraphs in our script here, as Axel and Potemkin represent character archetypes in fighting games that are often intentionally kept underpowered. Characters like Axel are commonly referred to as zoners, and characters like Potemkin are called grapplers, and if you're looking to get into a new fighting game without any prior knowledge into the game's tier list, a smart, educated guess would be to avoid characters like these.
I don't want that.
Developers often keep characters with Axel's extremely long-range normal attacks and Potemkin's insanely high-damage throws weaker on purpose, as to avoid player frustration when fighting them. But why are these characters so frustrating in the first place? Well, there's a lot we can dive into, but to put it the most simply, it's because they are built around exploiting mistakes. Axel is a character with extremely dominant control over the screen and can convert his hits into a combo from farther than anyone else, meaning if you're a beginner who isn't quite comfortable with utilizing your character's approach options yet, you're going to lose the entire match one tiny hit at a time before you're even able to get a single attack in.
So I know nothing about fighting genre, so I'm not going to say anything about that, but like I feel like that's an answer for yes then, right? Because like the punishing the mistake though is like not closing the distance in this case. I'm trying to relate it to something that I would think of as like in other genre. Like let's talk Overwatch for half a second. Like let's say Widow, right? Like Widow being really, really strong, you peek out, you're dead, right? Like the mistake you made was peeking out, right? But it's like, did you really make a mistake though? Like real talk, is it actually a mistake? Yes and no. Yes, it's a mistake. You should never peek the Widow. But how else are you going to play the game? Like you got to fight back at some point. You need to be able to take the fight. Like the way most people fight the Widow is by shooting back at the Widow, and then the Widow misses a shot or two, gets pressured, and then can't do it anymore. But like in a scenario where she does not miss, you lose that every single time. But there's a good chance she'll miss, and without peeking out, you don't get to play. So it's like, yes, it's a mistake, but that mistake is ridiculous. So I'll let them finish, but
this creates a lot of frustration, as the work the opponent has to do to approach Axel is much harder than the work Axel has to do to keep them out. And if you don't have a good grasp on the risk-reward balance of the game and its characters, which most beginners don't, fighting Axel can feel innately unfair. Of course, the better you get at the game, the more you start to realize this initial outlook was false. Axel has great long-range attacks and screen coverage, but due to his high recovery on most attacks, low HP, slower movement, and weak offensive and defensive options, he tends to be pretty weak when played at a top level. In the most recent Guilty Gear game Axel is playable in, he can only really be argued to be in the middle section of a tier list. In XR he's almost definitively bottom 3, and in Plus R he makes a notable exception, popping in slightly above the majority of characters. This trend is mirrored exactly by Potemkin, who's mediocre at best in Strive, terrible in XR, and pretty solid in Plus R.
okay.
However, these are just the two characters I'm using as an example. If you take a look at almost any fighting game, you're very likely to see these trends repeated, and if they aren't, there's usually some level of rule breaking that makes said character stand out from their low-tier brethren. A good example of this is Dalsim, who similarly to Axel is quite weak in a majority of his appearances, except in Street Fighter V. However, in that game, Dalsim actually has incredibly potent offensive pressure with his slides, dive kick, teleport mix-ups, and set play.
So it's like a
fireball.
noob stomper? Or?
As for grapplers, Zangief is also usually quite weak, but has an exceptional appearance in Street Fighter IV, where he sports a powerful, fast, long-range attack that slips through fireballs that no designer would dare give to a character of his stature ever again. It's important to note that while this bias is generally seen in a lot of games, there are some exceptions. The Mortal Kombat series frequently has zoners in the upper tiers.
It's like the
roster,
one category I don't know like shit about
is
fighting games like this.
Speaking of grapplers, we finished Axel's segment, but why are characters like Potemkin generally kept weak? Just like Axel,
I feel like the answer's
Potemkin
still
is a character about
yeah, you want to keep them,
but he does it in his own
weak.
unique way that developers also felt the need to keep intentionally underpowered. Potemkin is a character about his crushing offense, only needing 1 to 2 openings to win a round, with the real challenge being actually forcing his way in and winning said round. However, if two weaker players are playing, neither one of them is going to be apt at the neutral state of the game. And while Potemkin's high HP keeps him alive for longer as he gets tickled for mistake after mistake, as soon as the enemy player makes a mistake, it becomes possible for Potemkin to force them into a guess-for-game situation with his extremely powerful
Instead
throw,
of specialized
which,
players,
again,
such characters
can
get
feel
punished a lot more than a basic round of character and is more approachable by people.
unfair to less skilled
Fair.
opponents. If you're familiar with fighting games, you'll have heard that these two archetypes prey on two major emotions that their kits are designed to force you to feel. For Axel, that emotion is frustration. From the start of every round, Axel is at an advantage. Rounds that Axel wins last much longer than rounds his opponent wins, and he excels at making the opponent feel foolish for each decision they make. For Potemkin, that emotion is fear. The knowledge that at any moment Potemkin may throw out an attack that could rob you of your entire life bar causes you to make mistakes. Following these mistakes, his ability to put you in a guess-for-game situation where one wrong call could lead to a defeat means victories with Potemkin leave some players feeling cheated out of a win they felt they deserved. These emotions of fear and frustration are put first and foremost in matches against our two friends here. and if you're inexperienced with dealing with them, it can lead to serious discontent with the character or even the game
This
itself.
would 100% happen to me if I played
find
a
themselves getting frustrated easier rushing into Axis
fighting
attacks,
game
which will cause
right
them
now.
to make rash,
100%.
aggressive decisions, and wouldn't luck have it, that's exactly what Axel is waiting for, and he'll promptly blow them up as a result. Potemkin will leave these players feeling terrified of even standing anywhere close to him, constantly wasting opportunities, moving not enough or way too much, and flailing when on the defensive. And wouldn't luck have it, that's exactly what Pod is waiting for, and he'll promptly blow them up as a result.
Okay.
The exploitation of mistakes a beginner player would be more likely to make leaves characters like Potemkin and Axel in an awkward spot where they see disproportionate success at lower levels compared to higher levels, and
They are noob
developers have known this
stompers.
for a long time. This creates a discrepancy in the player base's perception of strength for these two characters. While the top 1% may understand that if you play around Axel and Pod's weaknesses, you have a high chance of success, 99% of players
That's a
won't even
very
know what
good
these
point.
weaknesses are. And
A lot of games are like that. Have characters that are at one level are thought of as really weak or very strong, and the
told them
opposite
they
of
likely
the
don't
other
care
end.
enough about the game to learn to exploit them. You frequently see beginner players complaining about the overpoweredness
Yeah,
of
everyone's saying Iron Fist right now.
characters like Axel, citing the inability to fight back at all when up against a zoner more knowledgeable in the game than them, and the same can be said for grapplers as well. If you just flat out removed these character archetypes, you'd not only alienate a large portion of the player base who enjoys playing them, you'd also lose a sense of proportionality within the tools the game allows you to choose. It's no coincidence that these two characters lie on the opposite ends of the spectrum of range, and if you removed both the longest range characters and the shortest range characters,
What would you say are some noob stompers and rivals? Jeff was for sure. Iron Fist probably was for sure. Iron Man or Wanda. Panther. Penny. Oh, Penny. Actually, yes. Ooh, Penny can be.
you'd be stuck with a less interesting game with fewer options to choose from. This problem has led developers to intentionally making
I wouldn't
these
say
types of
Venom.
characters underpowered at a high level of gameplay as a means to ally the character's strength with what the majority player base perceives it is. This is potentially the clearest cut example we have of developers intentionally designing a set of mechanics so that the worst player wins more often. Except this isn't even the only genre to do this, and it's actually eerie how close our next dilemma comes to this fighting game related example. Here, let me show you how close. Take this guy, now put him in 3D, give him guns, and there you go. You probably see where I'm going with this. If grapplers are as short range gets, and zoners are as long range gets, then it wouldn't be a stretch to call shotguns grapplers and snipers zoners. Other than the fact that shotguns don't tend to pick you up in spinning pile driver you,
I didn't say Penny was terrible. We were talking about noob stompers.
of course. The shotgun and the sniper are common points of contention among FPS players for almost the exact set of reasons I listed in our fighting game section. Sniper rifles are able to attack you at ranges where you can't deal any damage, causing you to get impatient and end up right in their scopes. Its counterpart, the shotgun, mirrors grapplers by lurking around tight corners and forcing you to take gunfights so close that the reduced field of view from a scope becomes a deadly weakness,
Nothing in 8
helping you
months.
with high damage shells that can kill in one shot should you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. As a result, we often see these weapons either intentionally undertuned or exceptionally hard to acquire to reduce player frustration. However,
Yeah, that makes
while
sense.
the shotgun tends to find itself nerfed to mediocrity just like its grappler brethren, we actually see the sniper stay a pretty strong and consistent option in a lot of shooter games, and I think I know why. You see,
The one
it
shot.
all comes down to player perception of skill. When talking about Axel earlier, we mentioned how his screen coverage is significantly higher than all of the cast, being able to attack from distances the opponent could never reach.
Yeah, but
This is true.
Let me guess. It's going to be like you have to know all those combos, keep them at range. That's a skill.
With the sniper,
Right.
But where one attack from Axel can cover upwards of 20% of the entire screen, a single shot from a sniper rifle exists only as a small straight line across a sprawling map, certainly not covering even a single percentage of overall screen space. This leads to a disconnect from the player's idea for how skillful each tool is to use, where because it's easier to hit your chain attacks as Axel than it is to hit snipes with the sniper must be the game's most skillful weapon, and Axel must be the game's least skillful character.
Yeah, like if you I guess the best way I could think of it is like you upload a video of you hitting a bunch of one shots on Widow or Hanzo, right? Or hitting these sick flicks or hitting these sick shots. You look like you're an insanely good gamer, like you're really, really good at the game. But if you upload a 5K Moira, it's like, why the f did you upload that?
In reality, this isn't quite the case. The game is balanced to proportionally reward the users of these tools based on the context they exist in. Axel's long-range attacks don't do very much damage, and they leave him quite vulnerable if he misses. And while a sniper rifle is significantly vulnerable after a single miss, most games allow them to one-shot any opponent with a shot to the head, and depending on the gun, maybe even the body too. While snipers do see just about as much complaining as zoners do, the simple fact that we perceive the sniper wielder as better than the opponent they killed means there's less of a need to intentionally weaken the tool. In stark contrast, many see people who play zoners as cowards who are worse at the actual game than the people they're zoning, pressuring developers to weaken those characters to make the match results more resemble these players' perceived
Oh, this happens in games all the time. You always get that guy who's like dying to something over and over and is like, dude, you guys are playing this X insert whatever thing. So fucking boring, man. You guys are so boring. You guys are boring.
Your opponent, even if the zoner is actually much better. So, we've looked at ways games allow for worse players to still experience victories over
I had a small Valorant arc where I played it for a few weeks.
Symmetry, and
didn't go well.
How player perception of strength and skill can impact how fairly balanced certain polarizing tools are. However, we haven't looked at any examples where it's clear, even from a passing glance, that the game wants the worst player to win. And while that sounds like a far-fetched idea, and game designers designing a game with the express purpose to make sure the worst player beats the better player is certainly hyperbole in its boldest form, there are examples of mechanics in games designed to give an edge exclusively to weaker players that better players are excluded from. If I had you play a game of Hangman right now and put up these 2 blank words consisting of 8 letters each, I bet a large amount of you could guess what words I just put up. Comeback mechanic.
I wouldn't have got it. Either I'm tired and checked out, or I'm terrible at Hangman. I wouldn't have got it.
If you're a gamer, you probably know what a comeback mechanic is. And if you're a competitive gamer, you probably already attach a pretty negative stigma to it. Chess has no comeback mechanics. If you're losing in chess, you have to claw your way back to victory the hard way, or resign early and learn from your defeat. Now, imagine if when you were the first player to be placed in check, you could bring any one of your pieces back from the dead.
Oh, yeah.
Comeback mechanic. Comeback mechanics are implemented in games to help the losing players get back into the fight, and are often a point of contention among more hardcore fan bases.
What are examples of games where that'd be okay? I feel like Mario Party, fine.
By definition, a comeback mechanic is unfair. The player who is performing worse receives a benefit for performing worse that the higher performing player never gets. Our competitive mindset...
Fatal Blow from MK? Fighting games. I know nothing about them.
As people,
I was gonna say, but basically the idea I was gonna behind like Mario Kart, like Mario Party is like more party games, if that makes sense. Games that are like meant to be like competitive but also a bit fun. I feel like that's fine. But even then, you know, I get where they probably wouldn't. People don't like them. And anything in the 15 months. Appreciate it. Thank you.
People who want to be rewarded for skill should tell us that such a thing shouldn't even be given a pass.
I mean, a comeback mechanics could it be considered support ults? No. If you're talking about support ults like in a hero shooter, no. Because that's part of their kit. Their own ultimate. It's not really a comeback mechanic. The way it's used can differ too. Like what happens if you use a support ult offensively? Still a comeback mechanic? No.
Passing thought. Never implemented into any serious competitive game. However, they keep showing up. Why? Well, as mentioned before, there's loss aversion. While the most objective end to an experience is the end of a round or game, losing smaller scale interactions more frequently doesn't feel good either. It sounds pretty backwards to say that if you're significantly better than your opponent in a fighting game, they should never get a chance to actually try to play it, because they'll have nothing to learn off of and have zero positive experiences within these matches. Comeback mechanics can exist on a small scale in these instances, such as meter being awarded to players for taking damage, which allows them to activate powerful invulnerable supers to stop the opponent from running them over and claw their way back into the game.
Oh,
however,
true.
These are comeback
Didn't think
mechanics
about that.
exist at the smallest of scales. Oftentimes, while you are rewarded meter for losing in fighting games, you're awarded even more of it for winning interactions.
Hero shooter comeback would be as you hit the last minute of a push, your ults start charging quicker, and the other team doesn't. No, because that doesn't happen. But you know what does happen, actually, is when it's overtime, respawns are longer. If you're attacking in, say, hybrid or escort, and you're on third point, and you're attacking, there's a reason why teams always cap in overtime. It's because those defensive spawns become much longer. I would consider... Oh, you're saying that could be considered. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, you're right. But actually... Oh, the overtime mechanic is kind of a comeback mechanic for the attacker because it gives the attackers a big advantage because the defenders advantage is having the spawn be so close, while the attackers typically have cover, or like, sorry, they have like the cover of the cart and also get healing off the cart. And typically it's easier to like take angles on attack, like once you push them out. Like it's easier to hold angles on defense, but like once you lose that advantage, like once you lose, like it flips, like it becomes so much harder to defend. So like not having those respawn times is kind of actually that would be a comeback mechanic, because it allows them to attack or to cap with no time left.
So it's more there to level out the playing field as opposed to directly hoist the weaker.
I hadn't thought about that before as a comeback mechanic.
You can find small-scale comeback mechanics like this in shooter games as well. In many game modes, the winning team needs to put in more effort to score a match-winning point than the losing team does to gain points of their own. This is very clearly seen in a lot of Overwatch's game modes, where the closer one team gets to a victory, the closer the losing team's spawn points are to the objective, and the farther the winning team's spawns are. This small-scale comeback mechanic is actually not that intrusive to competitive integrity, as while the
also the spawn times
is
an OT.
being rewarded, they'll inevitably have to climb that same hurdle if they want to end up winning.
Not pre-watched.
This type of mechanic only really adds the
Comeback
perception
mechanic.
of a back-and-forth game flow. The real type of comeback mechanic we look down
What do you
upon
think, 3
isn't
months?
one of those that rewards consistency. If we want to look at a comeback mechanic that actively benefits weaker players and breaks away from the consistency of stronger ones, we'll have to get a little more wild. The most obvious example of this type of mechanic would be Mario Kart's item system. In Mario Kart, the items a player gets from the item box are determined based on how far away they are from first place. The racer in first will
Really?
only ever get simple items like shells, bananas, and coins, whereas
Wait,
players in the
what?
back of
I
the
didn't
pack
know
will be
that.
rewarded with blue shells, lightnings, and bullet bills, items which can hit the racer at the front without any way for them to stop them, adding a heavy amount of randomness to the game's outcome. But Mario Kart is first and foremost a party game. Nintendo designed it to be a fun experience for the whole family, so it makes sense that it would reward weaker players. It's not designed to be taken seriously by 99% of its player base.
Right.
If we want to see comeback mechanics that exist in competitive experiences, we'll need to take a look back into the fighting game scene at a few games' most divisive features. Given that we talked about Dulcet before, I find it natural to use Street Fighter V as our example of a fighting game with an intrusive
Chat, someone said this earlier, like the
Street Fighter V
the
featured a
one
system
shot, like
mechanic
Mortal Kill
titled
or
the
something.
V system, which gave unique selectable options to each character that could be mixed and matched to the player's preference. One of these was your V skill, a simple unique action not unlike a special move, and the other was V-Trigger. V-Trigger could only be activated once the red bar at the bottom of the screen was filled up, and it granted an extreme power boost to certain attributes of a character.
What in
How do
the
you fill
world?
that bar, you may ask? Well, if I didn't clue you in over the last 20 minutes, you build that bar by being worse. Your V-meter only builds in 2 ways, taking damage and landing your V-skill. Now, this all sounds well and good, but the amount you got from landing a V-skill was extremely negligible, and even then, a vast majority of characters couldn't consistently get this to happen over the course of a match, meaning 9 times out of 10 you'd see V-Trigger get activated. It was because the user had just taken a chunk of damage from their opponent. Now, you may be thinking that this ends up working out similarly to our standard meter example, as in order to win a match, you'll need to give your opponent the same opportunity to build V-meter as they give you, but in reality, it didn't end up working out this way. Due to V-Trigger's large boost to a character's offensive capabilities, in certain instances it felt like winning early interactions in Street Fighter V matches would just lead to dealing 20% or so to the opponent's life, giving them V-Trigger, losing neutral to their more powerful toolkit, taking 50% or so damage before they run out of V-Trigger, and then being forced to play the rest of the match with just a sliver of health. Even though we secured the advantage first, we were punished for playing well, and ended up defeated without a fair lesson for us to learn from. And while this is a hyperbolized and heavily simplified example, this really is what V-Trigger felt like. Because of this mechanic...
DBZ Fighters comeback is fucked. Yeah, I heard Fighter Z had an interesting one way back when. I didn't follow the scene too closely though.
Controversy from the fighting game community, many of which believed the mechanic to be wholly uncompetitive. And even if you liked Street Fighter V as a game and didn't find V-Trigger as intrusive as its critics, they did objectively have a point there. But let's not just make this a dunk session on Street Fighter V. Is there any strategic benefit that players can exploit out of V-Trigger? Well, there most certainly is. Given that V-Trigger has a vulnerable activation period and generally doesn't make characters that much stronger on defense, it can't be used as a get-out-of-jail-free card when pressured by the opponent. To that end, top players occasionally began intentionally planning out their openings such that their combos would leave the opponent just outside of V-Trigger activation range, so that they could score one more solid hit before the risk of V-Trigger would be introduced into the round. Fighting games aren't strangers to these types of mechanics, with DBFC's Sparking,
That's so smart.
UMVC3's X Factor, and Tekken's Range Mode all being buffs activated by reaching a low health
Wait,
threshold
that's so
that can
smart.
let the losing player come back from the brink of defeat. And even then, these mechanics...
MOBAs have comeback mechanics, otherwise the team with an early lead would always win. Oh, you're right. MOBAs do. I'm trying to think of like Deadlock. Deadlock has some comeback
all
mechanics.
be played around by a skillful player through resetting combos and other means. While these mechanics are the worst of the worst when it comes to breaking competitive integrity for the sake of rewarding weaker players, it would be incorrect to say they don't add anything to the games they're in. V-Trigger, X-Factor, Sparking, and Rage are all extreme spectacles that get crowds of spectators hyped to see huge combos, and they introduce a unique aspect of decision-making for the stronger player that really forces them to prove they're better by outsmarting the game's mechanics and overcoming the odds. They may push the limit on what we consider to be fair to competitive integrity, but across the bigger picture, the better player is more likely to win in each of these games, proven by the top players of each scene remaining more consistently strong at every event you look at.
That's so smart.
So,
this fighting games are so complicated. I literally just don't have the time to get into it. I would have to spend so much time getting into fighting games. Like, I'd have to learn a whole new skill set, learning all of that stuff. Like, there's just no way.
should the better player always win? I know it's a tough
Fighting
pill to
game players
swallow,
are just
but
different.
to be honest, no. If you're designing an experience to be taken seriously, you may not want to implement blatant comeback mechanics like X Factor or V-Trigger, but making small sacrifices to competitive integrity to keep weaker players entertained as they improve is a surprisingly important step to an engaging competitive experience. The good that selectable characters bring to a competitive experience isn't outweighed by the bad they bring by introducing potential bad matchups or incorrect player skill perception. The struggle to capture a final control point compared to the ease of defending it loses its frustration when you
It's not
consider
like I
that
never
you're
played one
doing
before.
exactly what your opponent is going to need to do to win later on. But what do you think?
I'm
Do you
competitive.
believe that any game that plans on taking itself seriously should never even consider throwing the worst player a bone every now and then? Or do you think that people
that's a
will
good
never
point.
engage with a game's systems if they aren't given an opportunity to play and understand what winning looks like? Let me know in the comments below. And
That's
if
a
you
good
have
point,
any
actually.
examples of gameplay,
You do gotta throw 'em
Symmetry,
some bones
comeback
every once in a
mechanics,
while,
or
right?
anything you have to say regarding the subject, I'm pretty good about reading all the things you guys have to say, so be sure to let me know. This sure ended up being a long one, but for now though, that's all.
Yeah, it was pretty long. Very good video though. A very thought-provoking video. I don't know. I still think that, you know, not letting like extremely aggravating to play against characters be super strong is good, but there's definitely got to be like a limit to that somewhere. It's tough to say. Top comment: all my wins are deserved and I never lose. My opponents just cheated. Real. Good video though. Very good video.